Today, we are going to be focusing on one of my favorite characters in the series, No1 Zorro, or more specifically, on the phenomenal battles that he has been involved in over the course of the series. As an unapologetic Zoro fanboy, these portions of One Piece never fail to captivate me, so here we are. The criteria for this list is simple as: a fight is defined as an exchange of attacks between two or more individuals, one of which in this case must be Zoro. However, all fights on this list must also be canon due to top secret reasons to with national security. But with that out of the way, let's begin. Welcome to the top 10 Zoro fights in One Piece. Number 10. Zoro vs. Oden. We are going to commence proceedings in the realm of the sky against a breeder by the name of Oden. During NL's death game, Zoro became caught in Oden's ordeal of iron, the survival rate of which was 0%. And initially this was quite a tough match for the Strawhat swordsman, because he had to contend with the iron traps laid all around the battlefield, as well as Oden's gigantic fighting dog Holy. Furthermore, after dealing with those, Zoro had to very quickly adapt to Oden's sky sword, as well as his advanced use of observation haki, in a time long before the Straw Hats had any comprehension of haki whatsoever. Although in the end, none of that really mattered, as Zoro simply took Oden's attack head-on with his 108-pound cannon, negating the Skybreeder's strike, and proceeding to defeat him in a single slash, which is a classic Zoro motif in battle. Lose during the beginning, lose in the middle, and triumphantly overcome an opponent right at the end. Number 9. Zoro vs. Hachin. Here we have what I would call another type of very typical Zoro fight, whereby he enters the fray heavily wounded and at a statistical disadvantage. In this case, that statistic was the number of swords being used against him, which totaled 6, due to Hachin being a proponent of Rokutoryu. On top of that, Zoro also had the handicap of only possessing one sword, and having to improvise by using the blades of Johnny and Yosaku. Despite that, this match belonged to Zoro from start to finish, putting his mastery of swordsmanship on full display, but more importantly than that, this conflict reaffirmed Zoro's commitment to becoming the world's greatest swordsman. Plus, this was the first time we got to see Zoro use a Tatsumaki attack, which to this day is one of my absolute favorite moves in the series. And finally, the fight is also very nicely framed by the general atmosphere of the Arlong arc, making Zoro's struggle and victory all the more meaningful. Number 8. Zoro vs. Cody Jones. And in another stunning display of pure dominance, we have the short-lived conflict against the primary antagonist of Fishman Island, Cody Jones. Now, as the unofficial, but as we all know is true, first mate of the Straw Hats, from time to time Zoro has the honor of taking on opponents that are generally reserved for Luffy. However, in these cases, you don't generally expect Zoro to win, and here he essentially did just that. After deciding to submerge himself in water to take on the boss Fishman, Zoro got the better of Hody in a single flash, and threatened to end the entire Fishman Island arc right then and there. However, given that there was still more story to tell, Oda had to step in and tell Zoro to calm down, allowing Hody to cause more terror and eventually go on to be defeated by Luffy. But we will never forget that Zoro did it first. Number 7. Zoro vs. 100 Baroque Works agents. After many of the Straw Hats had been drawn in by a clever ruse on the island of Whiskey Peak, Zoro proceeded to initiate a Kill Bill-style takedown of 100 bounty hunters, including prominent Baroque Works members such as Miss Monday and Igaran. This was a very unique battle in the series because it's so rare that we see power displayed through sheer numbers. Usually this group of bounty hunters would be what we refer to as fodder villains, but in this case they caused Zoro a ton of trouble, and it was far from an easy victory for the swordsman. I mean, a comfortable victory perhaps, but not easy, and what also contributed to this was the fact that this was the first real test for Zoro's new swords at the time, Yubashiri and the Sandai Kitetsu, the latter of which Zoro discovered was a problem child. So it's like purposely putting yourself on a handicap. But that's precisely what makes this battle so entertaining. Seeing Zoro with perfect mastery defeating a bunch of bounty hunters wouldn't be any fun at all. Seeing him doing it whilst trying to maintain control of his own blades is just fascinating and really cool. Plus, this battle takes place at night, and I'm a huge fan of anything that happens in the evening, because it really amps up the atmosphere. All in all, a brilliant Zoro fight. Number 6. Zoro vs. T-Bone. Speaking of fights that take place at night, here is another. Although this conflict against T-Bone has an added layer of time limit in order to add further excitement. You see, the ever-honorable T-Bone was standing on the tracks of the sea train in order to prevent the Straw Hats from proceeding to any lobby. And well, that's just not cool, T-Bone. Not cool at all. In response, the Straw Hats dispatched their resident demon to deal with him and clear the way, resulting in one of the fastest yet extraordinarily memorable fights in the series. It only consisted of a handful of actions, but with this sequence I would like to give huge props to the anime, who did this sequence a whole world of justice, taking the utmost of care with every action performed and elevating it into a truly memorable Zoro fight. Number 5. Zoro vs. Kaku. Stepping straight off the sea train and into any lobby, we have the first example of a fight on this list that actually pushed Zoro to his his limits. As a member of CP9 and as a proponent of force or style, Kaku represented a very worthy opponent, demanding everything that Zoro had available to him at the time to overcome. For the most part, this fight is brilliantly choreographed, yes, even after Kaku turns into a giraffe, which is ridiculous because who would have thought that a giraffe swordsman would look so sleek? But what this conflict really highlights is that Zoro is at his best when he is met blow for blow, and forced to innovate and evolve himself, which he did rather shockingly in this case, by growing 2 extra heads, 4 extra arms, and 6 extra swords. I still don't really know what to make of Asura, but it certainly did cap off quite an amazing battle with pure demonic style. Number 4. Zoro versus Pika. In this unique contest, Zoro took on his largest opponent to date, not counting all, I guess, but unlike a lot of Zoro action sequences, this focused a lot more on thought and strategy as opposed to power and endurance. I mean, Pika was never really a true threat to Zoro. In fact, he was more like a colony of insects, that no matter how many you spray, you simply cannot rid your home of them. This fight required Zoro to observe, analyze, and counter Pika's abilities, and he performed that role to perfection, eventually luring out the Stone Insect King and defeating him with quite a classic attack actually, 3,000 worlds. And that's almost the most satisfying part of this entire engagement. Despite having been shown in the series way back in the Baratie arc, 3,000 worlds had never been used to defeat an opponent before now, so it was fantastic to see it finally achieve its intended purpose in this brilliant bout. Number 3. Zoro versus Bartholomew Kuma. Here we have what is certainly the most unconventional fight on this list today, as Zoro took it upon himself to confront one of the 7 Warlords of the Sea in a desperate situation after the crew had been devastated by the aforementioned Warlord versus Shock. And to put it simply, Kuma was not an opponent who Zoro had it in him to defeat at the time. However, that did not stop him from performing a superb Shishi-Son-Son that brought on the dramatic revelation that Kuma was in fact a cyborg. However, by far the greatest aspect of this engagement was when Kuma offered a change in terms by absorbing all of Luffy's pain and fatigue, and not only did this result in one of the finest Zoro moments of all time in regards to nothing happened, but it showed us as readers and watchers just how disgustingly durable the Strawhat swordsman is, pushing him to a limit that we had never seen before or since. Number 2. Zoro versus Mihawk. This fight stands out greatly as the only loss on this list for Zoro. Not only a loss actually, but a complete defeat in every way possible, and one that was very necessary for Zoro's character going forward. This battle is what gave Zoro, and I suppose the audience, a benchmark for exactly how far he and the rest of the Straw Hats had to go in order to achieve their dreams. And even though Zoro was dominated the entire way, it was still quite a spectacle to read and watch, as this fight gradually becomes less about actually winning, and more about Zoro simply proving himself to be a worthy swordsman, which he does by eventually earning Mihawk's respect. And as a reward, we get the tiniest of glimpses of what power is like at the very top of this world, as Mihawk elects to finish Zoro using his prized blade, Yoru. And I mean, just everything about this battle made the world feel so much bigger, which is a fantastic achievement for what is essentially just an action sequence. Furthermore, it also really came to define Zoro as a character, vowing never to lose again, and carrying a scar that will forever remind us of this encounter. Number 1. Zoro versus Daz Bones. Now, Daz Bones isn't a particularly important figure in the series, but what he represents to Zoro in this battle is one of the greatest character-defining moments in the series. Due to the power of the Super No Mi, Zoro as a swordsman was up against a hard counter, something seemingly impossible to overcome that we as readers and watchers could not help but be compelled to witness Zoro's struggle to push beyond the limits of a regular swordsman. And what a struggle it was. In fact, in my opinion, this is still Zoro's hardest fought battle to this day, with him being completely decimated for a good 99% of it. But on the brink of death is exactly where Zoro would find his answer, achieving a very enlightened sense of the world around him, and as a result the ability to cut or not to cut whatever he saw fit. And with this, it was over. One strike in this enlightened state was all it took to bring down Daz Bones, and it was incredibly satisfying to see after enduring all that had happened to Zoro during the fight. This conflict in general is also one of the most well choreographed in the entire series, featuring stunning imagery that had me hooked from beginning to end. A swordsman up against an insurmountable task, and pushing through it regardless. To me, this is the defining